clicked on this video, that means your aim is probably really bad, even though you aim train a lot. So I have a few tips for you guys that can help you out. And the first one is very, very simple, and it's your sensitivity is either too high or too low. Now, this tip is very important because if you see a player like Simple who is used to a high sensitivity, he is flicking to targets and shaking his mouse a lot, but that is him micro adjusting to the target. And since he's so used to high sensitivity, he is definitely okay with that extra movement that he has and that extra adjustment. But some of you newer players, or maybe even a little bit experienced players, might not be too adjusted to that high sensitivity. Now, the other thing with the low sensitivity, someone like Twist, he has really low sensitivity, and if you watch him play, he's really using his arm to aim, and that could be something that you guys aren't used to. A lot of players use a mixture of arm and wrist movement because they usually have sensitivity around, like, 2 sensitivity at 400 DPI, which involves some wrist like this, and then anything outside of this zone is definitely moving with your arm. So it's very important to note that you need to find what style works for you. If you're a high sensitivity guy and you can really adjust to these flicks like Simple does with his high sensitivity, that's something that obviously you guys could abuse. But also, if you're someone that likes to just move with your arm, I would definitely go for a lower sensitivity as well, because if you're not used to a low sensitivity, let's say there's someone in market door and I'm holding someone on bench, you could definitely under flick if you're too used to using your wrist, which is not good because there is a good movement room for your wrist. But if you have low sensitivity, obviously you have to use your arm for most of the time. There's an old video of Nico out there death matching and warming up where he's literally just using his arm and barely his wrist. So it's very important to note that you need to find that comfort zone for sensitivity, and then you can figure out if you should be using more of your wrist, more of your arm, or a little bit of both. Me personally, I use a little bit of both. I have my nice buffer zone for where my wrist is right here, but anything outside of this, I'm using my arm, and then I'm adjusting with my wrist if I'm, a little bit off of the target. So if you guys don't know how to find your sensitivity, luckily I did make a video on that. But before we get into the next tips, I appreciate if you guys check out the sponsor of this video, Skins Monkey. Today's sponsor is Skins Monkey. Skins Monkey is a CS2 skins trading site and marketplace that provides an instant way to get new skins. My favorite thing about Skins Monkey is that I can trade skins that I no longer want and trade it for a skin that is equal value. If you use code LouisCS2, you get a $5 bonus on your first trade. If you want to buy skins, you can get a 30% deposit bonus plus an extra 5% using my code. The link is down in the description. Now, after you got some cool skins in your inventory from Skins Monkey, let's talk about the next tip. And that next tip is simply just working on your micro flicks. Now, once you have your perfect sensitivity, it's very important to work on these little minor adjustments. Now, a good example of a micro flick is again over here towards bench. And if there's someone behind bench just constantly going left and right, this is pretty much a micro flick. Some people may say it's a little bit less because it's a little bit of a adjustment, but this is very important to practice because if I am, sitting here holding this guy and he wants to peek right, I should be able to instantly flick just like that. So this is one thing again where you need to find that perfect sensitivity. And again, go watch my YouTube video if you haven't watched it again on how to find that. And then once you kind of get used to working on these micro flicks, even if you're someone with low sensitivity and you find yourself, using a lot of your arm, something like this is definitely still wrist movement. So it's very important that you really train your wrist. Now, if you do have trouble aiming with your wrist, I do have some tips later on in the video that will definitely help you, because there are some problems that a lot of people don't understand and they think it's just in-game problems, but it's actually out-of-game problems. So since we are talking about out-of-game, let's get on to the next tip of this video. Now, this tip is very important because I see, players especially with high sensitivity do this, but when I see people with low sensitivity, kind of mimic this, it definitely isn't a good sign that their wrist isn't healthy. So it's very important to know if you do this, I would be careful and just make sure you guys are really taking care of your bodies. But someone, for example, like Nico, he's someone who likes to skip around his mouse like this when he's clearing angles, and he puts a lot of tension on his wrist. And you'll see him just like barely scooting his mouse with a lot of tension. It almost looks like he's skipping frames where he's just like scooting his mouse, scooting his mouse, scooting his mouse, and it looks a little shaky. And that means he's using a lot of tension. And Elise talked about using a lot of tension in your wrist, which is very bad because when you create that tension, it's almost like a build up. Let's say, for example, a buildup of energy. So when you have this tension building up, it's very hard to flick to another target. You have so much tension built up to one specific area, which isn't really good. You really want to make sure that you guys are practicing that smooth aim. For example, someone like Twist, again, I'll bring him up. He has very smooth aim. He's clearing these angles very smoothly, just like this. He's not, skipping around his mouse where he's like constantly just like skipping it like Nico does. Now obviously that could be because he uses a really low sensitivity or maybe someone with very high sensitivity, but I see a lot of players that have like a mid-level sensitivity that are really scooting their mouse like that, and it's not really good for your wrist, and it's really bad because you're building up that tension, and it's going to make it really hard to adjust to multiple targets. Because if I'm sitting here skipping my mouse, building up this tension, it's going to be really hard. As you can see, even when I pretend to do it, I can't even accurately flick to someone if they were, double peeking me window. So it's very important to note that you are just, using that smooth aim, and we'll get later on the video on how you can really use smooth aim with a little tip that I have talked about in past videos. So it's very important that you guys aren't, again, building up that tension because it's really bad, but also having tension in your wrist can be a really big problem and show that you might have some inflammation or something. So it's very important that you guys do some wrist stretches. My current IGL at the moment actually does tell me to do wrist stretches. He's a very experienced guy. He played on Evil Geniuses. So he tells me to do wrist stretches so I don't build up that tension or have inflammation, and make sure my wrist is very healthy just so it's not sore or hurting. I know a lot of Counter-Strike players have that problem at the moment. So there's a lot of good YouTube videos out there that you guys should look up, just some wrist stretches for gamers. There's a lot of good YouTube doctors, are tailored more towards the gamer side for you guys. So, you can work on those stretches if you're feeling a little bit sore, or, maybe you do have that tension or inflammation in your wrist. So it's very important to keep your wrist healthy because it's going to make your aim a lot better. Now, moving on for the next few tips here, talking about smooth aim, it's very important to have this anchor point on your mouse pad. Now, I put this part of my hand on my mouse, and what this does, it makes it so I'm not, constantly skipping around building up that tension. I can literally just soar on my mouse pad at a good head level at all times with this anchor point. This anchor point makes sure that I'm just obviously anchored on my mouse pad. My wrist isn't in the air, because if my wrist is in the air, it's going to be a lot harder for me to keep my mouse straight. But if I have that anchor point, it's almost like drawing a perfect circle, right? Where I can just keep just going left to right with a good anchor point. I'm not, going all over the place, which is, obviously very important in Counter-Strike, because you don't want to be going all over the place while these guys are coming out B. You just want to have that good anchor point where you can just flick to wherever they're going to be peeking you. So it's very important that you find that anchor point. This is my mouse grip right here, so obviously this is where my anchor point is, but everyone is different. Now, if you do play claw, where you're pretty much just holding the mouse like a claw, you're not going to have that good anchor point on your mouse, which is totally fine. Maybe you find a good anchor point is somewhere like on your forearm or your elbow, so you're staying consistent with where you're flicking. Now, me personally, I don't use claw, so I don't have that much experience with it. If you do palm the mouse, it is very important that you find that anchor point. Either it's, maybe on this side of the mouse, or maybe it's on this side, whatever's more comfortable to you. But if you do find that anchor point, you're going to find it a lot easier for you guys to flick to these targets, because there's really nowhere else for your mouse to move. It doesn't have a big buffer zone for you guys, so you're not just like constantly trying to adjust wherever you're flicking. Again, if you watch Simple, he's someone that doesn't really use an anchor point. He pretty much plays with his mouse just on the edge of the tables, so it's hard for him to have that anchor point, which is one reason why he's also so shaky. If you do really struggle with your aim, the anchor point is probably the best thing that you can do, in my advice, especially if you are a newer player or maybe even new to using a mouse. I've gotten a lot of YouTube comments where you guys have said like, my friend just started playing on the computer and he hasn't been using an anchor point because he's so used to playing on a controller. That is definitely one of the most important tips that you guys need to try. Find that good anchor point and you'll notice your aim will definitely improve by a lot. Now, this tip is a very quick tip, and it's very, very important, because once you found that anchor point, once you, release that tension from your wrist, it's very important that you're able to just directly flick to a target. I preach this in a lot of my aim training videos, where you need to be able to literally just instantly flick to the target. You don't want to curve around. You don't want to, zigzag to the target to try to find it. You want to just instantly flick. It should be a straight line. And I've made a lot of YouTube videos about some good aim training maps to practice this. Very important that you guys do this, because in Counter-Strike, time to kill is very important. You don't want to waste time by flicking around, doing, little rainbows and, becoming a leprechaun and just trying to find the pot of gold. You just want to simply just directly snap to the target. You don't want to waste any time, because once you start rising up in the ranks in Counter-Strike, you'll notice that time to kill is very important, and I preach that a lot. So it's very important that you do work on just literally instantly flicking to a target. You don't want to waste any time and just like trying to search for it. And again, like I said, making little curves or maybe like little zigzags or over flicking or under flicking where you have to adjust. But again, that is why you practice micro adjustments. Directly flick to the target, but if you are off, obviously by a little bit, you can hit that little micro adjustment and it's an easy fix. For all the tips that I have for you guys in this video, if you guys did enjoy this content, make sure you guys subscribe to the channel for some daily CS2 content, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.